There's many different models for open source in general. One of them is the Facebook way, right? So you have written something that you use internally and then you open source it. And Facebook, or the company formerly known as Facebook, has said that one of the reasons that they do that is because it sort of enforces like a level of quality on the software. Like it forces their engineers to make sure that the APIs are consistent, to make sure that there's documentation for things. So that's great. Like that's a forcing function for them, which is brilliant. And React has grown massively, right? But there's other projects that maybe Facebook's open source that they've not been as brilliant at interacting with the open source community for, because at the end of the day, it's there to serve their purposes and they're kind of open sourcing it as like a nice thing to give to the community, but it still needs to solve their problems. There's another type of open source, which is where someone sees a problem and thinks, I want to work on that problem. And I think that is great. Like that's what I've done with PostGraphile, right? I've seen this problem. I'm not using it to build another piece of software. PostGraphile is my software. I have customers and clients that are using it, so I work with them, but they're not my projects. And like at any point they could just say, okay, thanks, Benjie, you've been really helpful, but like we don't need you anymore. And that would be fine, right? That's entirely their prerogative. So, but one of the great things about a tool like this that's managed independently of one owning corporation is that lots of corporations can all contribute to the greater good, much in the same way that I said with the GraphQL Foundation and the GraphQL spec. It's like now owned by the community. And that's really great. But if a project's not the size of GraphQL, and you've got to factor in GraphQL is pretty big, like, you know, it's growing rapidly, but it is also huge. There's implementations in all the different ecosystems. There's people like, you know, GitHub and Netflix and the like that are using it at scale. So there's a lot of money there, really. Whereas the smaller scale projects, I mean, even something like Webpack, right, has struggled with funding. It's a software project that is not the secret source. You know, if Netflix uses Webpack for their website, right, that is not secret source for Netflix. It's not sharing that with everyone's not gonna make any impact on their bottom line. But if they were to give, you know, a certain amount of money to Webpack, and every other company that were to use Webpack were to give a certain amount of money to Webpack, suddenly Webpack would be able to afford much more development resources, and the amount of benefit that all of those companies would get out of that, whether it be smaller bundle sizes or faster bundling or all these other things that could come out of it, is much more than if they'd have just spent that same amount of money on paying one of their engineers to try and improve that thing. Because it's like the many, many, many hands help to lift this much more efficiently. But I think that we, as a like commercial ecosystem, it's very hard for companies to justify that investment. And it seems to me very short-sighted. Like, you could look at Webpack and say, I'm using it and it is free and it does what I need. Great, done. But if you actually think about the amount of like developer hours that you lose from waiting for Webpack to build, or from this, I'm sorry to pick on Webpack, it's just an example. Like, I love Webpack, it's great. If those people that were working on it were able to spend more time, you know, optimizing it or adding extra features that everybody needs, not that one specific company needs, it would be brilliant for everyone. And we really need to help companies to see this and to actually, you know, put their hand in their pocket and give money to open source maintainers like me, like the people behind Webpack, and like behind the vast majority of the software that powers today's internet, the vast majority of which is open source, right? I mean, we've just had, this will be out of date by the time this goes out, but we've just had this log4j vulnerability, right? And again, this is primarily one person that's maintaining this project unthanklessly, like in the XKCD. And suddenly there's been this massive problem that has affected the entire industry, like basically anyone who uses Java at all. And no one was like I think he had one or two sponsors before this happened. You know, it's silly. We should be supporting these projects, all of these projects throughout the entire stack. And we should get people used to doing that.